People often assume narcissists are these unstoppable forces, chaotic storms you're supposed to tolerate. But that's simply not true. In reality, most narcissists collapse the moment they face someone who understands how their psychological system actually works. And if you've spent years feeling overpowered, manipulated, or silenced, you're about to realize something unsettling. You were never as helpless as they made you think. In this talk, I want to guide you into a different way of seeing yourself, a stronger, clearer, more awake version of you, the version narcissists quietly fear meeting. We're going to break down the patterns they depend on, the pressure points they never expect you to touch, and the 6 specific changes that make a narcissist slowly step back and realize you're no longer available for their games. By the time this video ends, you won't just understand narcissists better, you'll understand yourself better. And that's what shakes them the most. When people talk about boundaries, they often imagine something polite or soft, like gently asking someone to please stop hurting you. But that's not what I'm talking about. A boundary isn't a suggestion, it's not a debate. A boundary is a firm line in the sand that says, this is where I end. And if you cross this line, there will be consequences. Not threats, not theatrics, just reality unfolding the way it needs to. And for many of you, that's the exact skill you were never taught. Most of you were conditioned, sometimes by family and sometimes by society, to believe that being agreeable is the highest form of goodness. You were told that staying quiet makes you kind, that tolerating disrespect makes you strong, that absorbing someone else's chaos makes you compassionate. But that lesson is twisted, because if you refuse to defend yourself, what you're really doing is teaching the world how to mistreat you. Narcissists especially, they're experts at spotting people who won't enforce boundaries. To them, that's like scenting blood in the water. I want you to picture a castle. Not a fairy tale castle, but a real one with cold stone walls, tall towers, and a gate that only opens with intention. That castle is you. Your values, your identity, your time, your emotional strength all live inside it. Now imagine leaving the gate wide open because you don't want to seem rude. Anyone can walk in. Strangers, thieves, people with hidden motives. You don't want trouble, so you stay quiet, and slowly, piece by piece, your castle stops feeling like yours. That's what happens when you don't enforce boundaries with the narcissist. They see the open gate and assume it belongs to them. Setting boundaries isn't about being aggressive. It's about being clear. And clarity terrifies a narcissist because it forces them to face something they cannot stand. Limits. They thrive in the gray areas, the vague, the emotional, the uncertain. The moment you bring structure, the moment you say no calmly and directly without explaining yourself like a child asking for approval, something shifts. You interrupt their entire power system. Let me show you a simple example. You have a friend who constantly insults you in that joking tone that makes it hard to confront. You finally say, I'm not staying in conversations where I'm the joke. If it continues, I'll step away. Notice what you did. You didn't shout. You didn't justify. You didn't dig into your feelings. You stated the truth and the consequence. That's a boundary. Now watch what follows. A narcissist will either test you or pull back. They test you because they hope you won't follow through. They retreat when they realize you actually will. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Boundaries only work when you enforce them without emotional chaos. If you're begging, crying, oversharing, or trying endlessly to explain, you're not setting a boundary. You're performing one. And narcissists love that because emotion is leverage. They don't hear your words, they read your weakness. So you have to separate your emotion from your enforcement. When you say no, you mean it. When you walk away, you don't pause. When you create a rule, you're not waiting for their approval. Some of you avoid boundaries because you think it will make people angry. And yes, narcissists will get angry. But here's what you must understand. If someone gets furious because you refuse to let them mistreat you, their anger is not proof your boundary is wrong. It's proof that your boundary is overdue. Here's something even deeper. Setting boundaries isn't only about managing narcissists. It's about transforming yourself into someone who is no longer drawn to them. Because once you build the inner strength to protect your values, you become someone they can't manipulate easily. You stop sending the hidden message that says, I'll take anything as long as you don't leave. You start sending the message that says, your behavior decides your access to me. And that's where your life starts to change. For many of you, setting boundaries will feel uncomfortable at first. That's normal. Growth always feels like friction. But the discomfort of protecting yourself is nothing compared to the suffering that comes from abandoning yourself. When you draw your line firmly and enforce it calmly, you tell the world, I'm not here to be used. I'm not here to be diminished. I'm here to live with truth, strength, and self-respect. That's how you make a narcissist never mess with you again. You build the walls of your castle not to shut people out, but to make sure only those who value you can come in. One of the most surprising things I've learned personally and professionally is how many people hand over their power without knowing it. They give it away like an offering because they were trained to believe that someone else's approval determines their worth. Narcissists survive on that. They depend on it. They feed on it like fuel. If you break that cycle, if you detach from their validation, you cut the supply line that keeps their influence alive. Most people don't realize how deep this dynamic runs in daily life. Maybe you grew up chasing a parent's praise that rarely came, so you connected attention with value. Maybe you stayed in a relationship where emotional rewards were unpredictable, spaced out in a way that kept you chasing the next small moment of affection. Narcissists use this exact pattern. They give crumbs of approval, tiny signs of affection, small drops of attention, just enough to keep you hooked. Then they pull it away. They punish you with silence, criticism, distance, just enough to make you chase. They're not looking for love, they're looking for control. Picture this. Every time a narcissist criticizes you, they study your face. They search for that slight break, that confusion, that guilt. If you defend yourself or try to prove your intentions, they take it as confirmation that their opinion matters more than your inner truth. That's how the psychological trap works. You respond to their moods instead of your own values. And once they know they can push those buttons, they will keep pushing. Detaching from their validation means understanding something essential. You don't have to earn approval from someone who benefits from your insecurity. You must truly internalize that, or you'll keep circling around people who never deserved your emotional investment in the first place. Let me give you a workplace example. You have a coworker who constantly undermines you. One day they say something encouraging. The next day they tell you you're failing. You react. You work harder. You stay later. You twist yourself trying to win that rare moment of acknowledgement. That's the trap. They've trained you to respond to inconsistency. And once you're hooked, they control your emotional state. Now imagine something different. They make a passive-aggressive remark and you simply nod. Not out of defeat, but neutrality. You don't defend yourself. You don't adjust your behavior. You stay centered. Their power collapses because the only control they had was through your reaction. You just unplug the entire system. Detaching from their approval feels strange at first. You may think, if I don't chase their validation, will they think I don't care? Will they leave? Will they get upset? Yes, maybe. But that discomfort is the sign that you're finally taking your life back. Think of a narcissist as an actor who expects you to play your assigned role. When you detach, you simply walk off the stage. They can keep performing, but there is no audience. And an actor without an audience loses their influence. That's why detachment is such a powerful psychological tool. You stop basing your worth on their unstable standards. You root yourself in truth, competence, responsibility, the things that actually sustain a meaningful life. And once you do that, you become someone a narcissist cannot manipulate because the strings they used to pull no longer exist. Something incredibly freeing about saying, even silently, your approval does not define me. It's not ego, it's maturity, it's understanding that your worth isn't up for discussion. Once that becomes your foundation, narcissists lose interest. They can't play their tricks on someone who refuses to pick up the pieces. If you want to ensure a narcissist never messes with you again, this shift is essential. You must become someone whose self-worth comes from within, not from praise, not from criticism, not from emotional breadcrumbs. When you detach from their validation, you take back your clarity, your autonomy, your direction. And that is the moment a narcissist realizes they no longer have access to you, not because you ran or fought, but because you finally woke up. One of the most fascinating truths about human behavior is how heavily people respond to emotional reactions, especially explosive ones. A narcissist in particular is tuned into emotional chaos, like a predator tuned into movement. They don't listen to your words, they watch your reactions. They study the tension in your body, the shift in your voice, the fear in your expression. To them, emotion is a tool. If they can stir it, they can guide it. And if they can guide it, they can control you. This is why learning calm, controlled responses is one of the strongest psychological skills you can develop. Not just for narcissists, though it destroys their strategy completely, but for life as a whole. When you become someone who responds instead of reacts, you rise above the emotional storms that trap most people in cycles of conflict. You gain presence, you gain stability, and that stability intimidates someone who relies on throwing you off balance. Narcissists provoke emotion because they struggle to regulate their own. They survive by disrupting others. If they can make you angry, suddenly you look like the problem. If they can make you cry, they regain control. If they can trigger guilt or shame, they gain emotional ground. They don't win through logic. They win through emotional chaos. That's why calmness is such a powerful counter. It's not weakness, it's strength used with precision. It's refusing to let someone else take the wheel of your emotional life. Picture this. A narcissist accuses you of something unrealistic, designed to hurt. Maybe they say, "You're so selfish, you only think of yourself." The usual untrained reaction is to defend yourself, explain everything, argue your innocence. But when you react that way, you already lost. You entered their emotional arena. Now imagine this response instead. You pause, breathe, and say, "I'm not engaging in conversations that aren't based in reality. No anger, no sarcasm, just clarity." Watch how they freeze. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't react. Their script depends on your emotional energy. Without it, the whole strategy collapses. It's like trying to light a fire with wet wood. There's no spark. I often use the mountain metaphor. A mountain doesn't panic during storms. It doesn't tremble when lightning strikes. It stands steady because its strength comes from within, not from the weather around it. You must become that mountain, not because you're hiding emotion, but because you're mastering it. Let me offer another example. A narcissist makes a passive-aggressive comment like, "I guess you're too busy to care." The usual reaction is guilt or explaining yourself. But a calm response is simply, "That's an incorrect assumption." And then you move on. You stay neutral. You stay steady. And that neutral energy is what disarms them. Calmness is kryptonite to narcissists. Not because it's gentle, but because it's controlled. When you control your emotions, you become unpredictable to them. They can't read you or manipulate you. They can't get the emotional hit they depend on. They expect drama. They expect defensiveness. They expect collapse or rage. What they don't expect is a grounded person refusing to join their chaos. But staying calm takes practice, especially if you've spent years reacting emotionally. It takes awareness and discipline. But once you master it, not only do you weaken the narcissist's influence, you strengthen every part of your life. Relationships improve, decisions become clearer, stress becomes easier to manage. You recognize manipulation before it reaches you, and most importantly, you stop handing toxic people the keys to your inner world. This isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about owning it. You communicate something powerful without raising your voice. "I am not your puppet. I am not moved by your chaos. I choose my response." And in that moment, the narcissist realizes you're no longer someone they can control. You've grown beyond their emotional tricks. You've taken back control of your life. Be the mountain. Let their storms come and go. You remain steady, not because you're cold, but because you're in command. One of the most striking things about dealing with narcissistic people is that their power doesn't come from strength. It comes from confusion, your confusion. They operate in shadows, uncertainty, emotional fog. They depend on you not being able to define what's happening, because as long as you can't name the pattern, they can keep using it. The moment you become clear, direct, grounded in reality, you expose their tactics in a way they cannot handle. Your clarity is like sunlight to something that survives in the dark. Most people don't realize how often they excuse behavior instead of identifying it. They say, "Maybe I misunderstood," or "Maybe I'm overreacting," or "Maybe they didn't mean it like that," in that hissy, Manipulation thrives. Narcissists rely on your self-doubt. They rely on your hesitation. They rely on your inability to call a pattern exactly what it is. Picture standing in a dim room with a pile of rope in the corner. From far away, it looks harmless. But when you move closer, you notice a slight movement. You hesitate. You tell yourself it's probably fine. Only when you turn on the light do you see it's not rope, it's a pile of snakes. The danger was always there, clarity just revealed it. That's what naming narcissistic behavior does. You turn on the light. Let me show you an example. Someone constantly rewrites history, insisting events didn't happen the way you remember. Classic gaslighting. Most people react emotionally or freeze in self-doubt, but imagine saying calmly, "That's not true. Here's what happened." You're not yelling, you're identifying. And narcissists cannot stand mirrors. Or imagine they try triangulation, bringing someone else into the dynamic to create jealousy. Instead of reacting, imagine saying, "It seems like you're comparing me to someone else to create tension." I'm not participating in that. That one sentence exposes the strategy, and exposed tactics lose power. Manipulation only works when you can't see the mechanism behind it. People don't suffer because they're weak. They suffer because the manipulation is subtle. Narcissists use denial as a weapon. "I didn't say that. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive." But when you bring clarity, you're shifting blame, you're deflecting, you're invalidating my experience. You interrupt their entire system. It's like revealing a magician's trick. Once you know how it works, you can't be fooled again. And here's something crucial. Exposing patterns doesn't mean yelling or attacking. It means clarity for yourself, for your communication, for your perception. You're clearing your mind. You're saying, "I see what's happening. I'm not confused anymore." That alone shifts everything. Let me give you a small but powerful example. A narcissist criticizes you suddenly. Instead of absorbing it, you say, "Are you trying to make me feel insecure?" It's a simple question, but it's devastating because it reveals intention. Manipulators cannot function when their intentions are visible. Will a narcissist like this? No. Their discomfort isn't proof you're wrong. It's proof your clarity is working. Clarity builds a shield. When you can name behaviors, you stop internalizing the chaos. You stop blaming yourself. You stop doubting your sanity. You regain your psychological balance. Once you see the pattern, you can predict it. Once you predict it, you can choose your response. And once you choose your response, they lose control completely. This is how you make a narcissist think twice before trying to manipulate you again. You become someone who sees clearly, someone who turns on the light, someone who cannot be confused into compliance anymore. Narcissists cannot survive in the presence of truth. One of the most destructive habits people fall into, usually without noticing, is trading their self-respect for someone else's approval. It's subtle, slow, and emotionally damaging. Narcissists detect that tendency quickly. If they see that your wish to be liked or accepted is stronger than your desire to honor your own dignity, they know they can move you, guilt you, twist you, and shape you. And the sad part is many people don't realize it until they're already deep in the trap. Let me tell you something essential. Self-respect is non-negotiable. It's not optional. It's not something you set aside to keep the peace or avoid conflict. It is the structural foundation of your emotional life. If you abandon it, you collapse from the inside. Narcissists know. They test you by ignoring your needs, disrespecting you, dismissing your feelings, not because they're bold, but because they're checking to see whether you'll trade your dignity for a moment of approval. Think of it like a currency exchange. Every time you tolerate disrespect, you are trading a piece of your worth for a small piece of external approval. And that's a terrible trade, because approval from a narcissist is fake currency. It looks real, but it falls apart the moment you lean on it. Here's an example. You share an achievement you're proud of. Instead of celebrating you, your partner says, "That's not a big deal." In that moment, you have two choices. You either hold onto your self-respect and say, "That achievement mattered to me, and I'm not letting you minimize it." Or you laugh it off, pretend it didn't hurt, and hope they'll treat you better next time. One path protects your dignity. The other invites more disrespect. Narcissists never respect people who betray themselves. They only respect inner strength, the kind that says, "I value myself too much to allow this." When you choose self-respect over their approval, the dynamic changes completely. You're no longer the student trying to please the teacher. You become an equal, or even a mirror. showing them who they really are. Narcissists hate mirrors. That's why you must root yourself in something deeper than external opinions. When your worth comes from your actions, values, discipline, and principles, you become immune to manipulation. You stop chasing the crumbs narcissists throw to keep you dependent. Approval is cheap. It shifts based on convenience, but self-respect is built internally, through hard choices, through standing up even when you're scared, through walking away from situations that disrespect you. Think of a tree. A tree doesn't shrink because another tree disapproves. Its roots give strength, not the weather around it. Your self-respect is those roots. It keeps you standing when someone tries to push you down. It keeps you stable when someone tries to shake your identity. Here's another example. A narcissistic coworker tries to take credit for your work. You feel the sting. Part of you wants to stay silent to avoid conflict. But then you ask yourself, am I really willing to give up my dignity just to avoid their reaction? Or do you say calmly, that was my work and I want to make sure that's clear? It's uncomfortable, but it's powerful. You're choosing dignity over ease. And here's the twist. When you choose self-respect over approval, narcissists withdraw. They may test you again, but they don't attach to people they cannot control. You become too centered, too steady, too self-defined. You become someone who cannot be controlled by flattery or broken by criticism. That's the kind of inner strength that destroys manipulation entirely. This isn't arrogance. It's understanding that your worth is not up for negotiation. When you choose self-respect over someone else's approval, you send a quiet but powerful message. You don't get to define my value. And at that moment, the narcissist loses their grip, not because you fought harder, but because you finally chose yourself. There is something incredibly freeing about building a life that simply has no room for narcissistic interference. Not because you're hiding or scared, but because your life becomes so structured, so purposeful, so grounded in responsibility and meaning that their chaos can't take root. A narcissist cannot destabilize what is already steady. They cannot manipulate someone who is already directing their life with intention. Narcissists only thrive where there are gaps in boundaries, gaps in identity, gaps in purpose. They slip through the empty spaces. They influence the parts of you you haven't fully claimed. They push where your foundation is weak. So the strongest thing you can do, the thing that makes them lose interest or reveal themselves, is to build a life so complete there's no space for their manipulation. Think of your life as a house. If the structure is unfinished, the walls loose, the door missing, anyone can walk in. People with bad intentions, people who thrive on disorder, people who seek control. They enter not because you invited them, but because the door was open. But imagine a house built with care. The walls are firm, the door locks, the foundation is deep. That's what a purposeful life looks like, not perfect, but stable. Here's an example. Someone in your life starts drama, sends emotional messages, tries to create insecurity. If your life is empty, no goals, no discipline, that drama becomes the main event. You get pulled in, you react, you get stuck. But if you're busy building your future, working on skills, career, health, habits, relationships, the drama barely affects you. Not because you're cold, but because your life is already full. There's no room for toxicity to anchor itself. Narcissists hate this. They need your time. They need your attention. They need you emotionally available for their crises. But someone who is building a meaningful life becomes impossible to manipulate. You're anchored in something bigger than their games. You're like a ship with a strong rudder and a clear destination. Waves don't steer you. Storms don't push you off course. Currents don't drag you anywhere. But if your ship has no direction, even small waves can push you off balance. Narcissists love drifting ships. They avoid captains. Another example, a narcissistic friend guilt trips you for not replying quickly. I guess I'm not important to you. If you're ungrounded, you panic. You over-explain. But if your life is full of purpose, you can calmly say, I was busy. I'll respond when I can. This isn't rebellion. It's what happens naturally when you have priorities. When your life is driven by discipline, responsibility, and meaning, you stop attracting emotional parasites. You stop signaling, I'm available for chaos. You start radiating, I'm focused and moving forward. And narcissists don't approach people like that because they know they can't win. They know you won't bend easily. They know you'll question their behavior. They know you won't play their games. You become a psychological fortress, not guarded, just grounded. If you want to become immune to manipulation, don't just fight narcissists. Outgrow them. Build habits that make you emotionally independent. Build standards that eliminate the need for approval. Build a future that's too important to risk for someone who thrives on dysfunction. When you do that, narcissists won't just leave you alone. They'll avoid you. They'll sense you're not someone who can be destabilized or controlled. You're someone who is moving forward with or without them. And that's a kind of strength they cannot challenge. When you step back and consider everything, we've talked about every boundary you've set, every piece of emotional space you've taken back, every moment where you stop giving them fuel, you'll notice something powerful happening inside you. You're not just learning how to handle a narcissist. You're learning how to handle life. You're learning how to navigate manipulation, conflict, pressure, and uncertainty. You're learning how to stand firm in yourself in a world that constantly tests your integrity. And that's the real victory. Not that the narcissist stops messing with you, but that you stop giving them access to your emotional world. People think the goal is for the narcissist to leave them alone. But that's not the real success. That's just a result. The real success is becoming someone who cannot be controlled by another person's chaos, someone whose self-respect is so strong that their games feel small, someone who realizes the battle was never theirs to begin with. You don't defeat a narcissist by fighting harder. You defeat them by stepping out of the arena entirely. When you stop participating, when you stop reacting, when you stop compromising your dignity for connection, you become someone they can't reach, someone they can't influence, someone they can't shake. Look at your own life for a moment. Where are you still letting someone access your emotional wiring? Where are you tolerating behavior that chips away at your confidence? Where have you confused endurance with strength? Because endurance is passive. Strength is active. Strength is choosing. Strength is drawing a boundary and saying, this is what I will allow, and this is what I will no longer accept. Strength is the moment you decide that your peace matters more than their approval. Strength is the quiet shift where you finally choose you.